Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel Tour update. And as we're set to deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, it's always important to remember how the war began. 385 days ago, on October 7th of last year, the Islamist Hamas and its terror affiliates in the Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping about 250 people, including elderly, men, women, children, and infants. 101 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. The subsequent day, Iran essentially joined the war by greenlighting its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, to launch cross-border attacks against Israel. Since then, Hezbollah has launched over 12,000 projectiles towards Israeli territory, and not the Lebanese-Iranian proxy alone. Additional proxies in in Syria, in Iraq, and Yemen have also joined the attacks against Israel, including Iran proper. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, what can you update us with on the latest?
So, it's a very grim day in Israel as reports of casualties keep coming in. At least 10 Israeli soldiers, 9 of them in the reserves, have been killed in Lebanon over the last day or so. And it is not certain that this is the final number of casualties in Lebanon and Gaza altogether. Also, civilians have been hurt, including in the Arab town of Majd al-Krum. Some of the casualties there have been hurt, perhaps even more than hurt, by a Hezbollah rocket, which of course does not distinguish between Arabs and Jews, Muslims, Christians. They are trying to kill everybody. The Mossad chief, David Barnea, is supposed to go to Doha on Sunday to meet with his American counterpart, Bill Burns, as well as with the Qatari negotiator for Hamas. But it is not clear yet who speaks for Hamas right now, after Yahya Sinwar has been eliminated. And some ministers in the Israeli cabinet have voiced their opposition to this mission by the Mossad chief, saying that Israel should not negotiate with Hamas, and especially through Qatar, and should go on with its military campaign in Gaza. But the families of the hostages, there are 101 hostages, a few dozen of them alive, the other already dead, kept in captivity, and the families are rooting for this final effort by the Biden administration before the elections to succeed.
Indeed. With regard to your first remark, obviously our hearts go out to all the families of the fallen and the speedy recovery for all those who've been wounded. One of those fallen happens to be also a cousin of one of the hostages in Gaza, which is, of course, very painful for the family to be in a continuous agony of not only not knowing the situation of one of their son and relative in Gaza, but also, of course, paying the ultimate price for the sake of freedom and security. On the matter of the military campaign in the Gaza Strip, and of course the anticipated negotiations, the center of gravity has shifted to Qatar, from what I'm being told. Hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel will emerge, but irrespective of what chatter comes out of a number of the ministers in the government, ultimately Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been very clear and is very in tune with the fact that the military campaign is a means to an end, to transition at some point, of course, to the other tools of politics that will enable Israel's strategic interests upheld for the long run. But let's now turn to Central Israel, where we're joined by Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, an Israeli Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to immediately dive into the Gazan front, where we just saw IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzia Levi, visiting the 162nd Division in Jabalia, during the course of which he highlighted, among others, the fact that Jabalia has yet again fallen. Hamas, we see groves of Hamas terror operatives surrendering, and it seems like the IDF continues to gain quite the operational achievements in the battlefield, irrespective of the challenges at hand.
Yeah, Gaza is a super complex landscape militarily, and because it's such a densely populated small piece of land, it's the classic trap for a continued counterinsurgency campaign that we will be bogged down into for many, many years if we don't turn this quickly into some kind of diplomatic or civilian structure. It's not even diplomatic because it's not clear who diplomacy is actually going to be dealt with. There's a real need today. It shows you the limits of military might, whatever it is. If the goal in Gaza is to create a different structure, Israel needs to quickly work with Egypt and with other like-minded regional players and leverage the military gains into some kind of civilian construct in Gaza. I know some achievements have been made, but there are still enclaves of Hamas in Gaza and in other places. I think if you want to focus and really stop this ongoing again and again insurgency type of warfare, the only way to do this is to focus, first of all, in the north, keep holding the south and focus on one area, because everybody's concentrated now in the north in Lebanon. That's the only way to do it, because the forces are really, really tight and there's not much room for overwhelming the enemy. Bottom line, it is a real challenge. Who do you negotiate with? How do you create the terms and the necessary constructs for any civilian order in the next few months? It's going to take time, and Israel needs to find who to work with. There are some options, but still many, many risks.
Indeed. Let's turn now to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by retired Colonel Joel Rayburn, formerly a senior director at the National Security Council in Washington for many of the countries in the Middle East, a U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, and currently, of course, the founding director for the American Center for Levant Studies and a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. It's good to see you, Joel. I'd like to immediately ask you about the Gazan front. We see U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken concluding his visit to Doha, Qatar, after which he traveled today to Amman, Jordan, for meetings with his Jordanian counterpart, Ayman Safadi, during the course of which there was some talk about the Gaza Strip, but chief focus on the Lebanese front. Is there a certain shift from the focus in Washington to be able to focus predominantly on the high-intensity warfare rather than the Gazan theater?
Well, yes, there is, but I should caveat that by saying that shift in focus is among those that are paying attention to the Middle East at all. And I have to say that what's happening in the Middle East and in Europe It's happening against the backdrop of we are 11 days from a very consequential presidential election here in the United States. And so until and probably for some time after our November 5th presidential election, there's very limited bandwidth in the public, in the media, and in the government here for anything other than our political process. I think, and the entire Middle East, I know, is watching it as well. The entire world is watching this election because you're likely to have, it seems to be becoming more and more likely that there's going to be a second Trump administration, and that means that there's going to be a significant set of changes across all of U.S. foreign policy, but the Middle East is going to be one where I think there's going to be a sharp change in particular. And people are starting to calculate for that. And it also means that there's very limited leverage that U.S. negotiators have right now in trying to achieve some of the things that they're wanting to achieve. I think it's still probably possible for them to work out some limited agreements, such as for I hope, just like everyone does, the return release of the hostages and an end to Hamas's military activities in Gaza. But anything larger than that, and I think the Lebanon front is larger than that, and the conflict with the Iranian regime, between the Iranian regime and Israel, is larger than that. I think those things are unlikely. There's unlikely to be progress toward a political resolution of those issues until after it's known the outcome of the U.S. presidential election, and maybe even sometime after that. So we're in sort of we're in a window where there's not much bandwidth to do anything but mind the outcome of our own election here.
Thank you, Colonel. Mr. Owen, a two-legged question. The first one, are we to expect a different Biden administration between November 5th and January 20th, respective to who is going to win the election, be it Harris or Trump? And the second part of that question, we did hear specifically the Chief of General Staff, Herzi Halevi, speaking about the fact that Hezbollah is pretty much done with when we're talking about the top echelons, and therefore there is a possibility in which Israel could secure its prime strategic goals for the border region, namely the dismantling of terror infrastructure along the border region, and then capitalize on diplomacy in order to establish a hard stop.
Well, I can predict quite confidently that either Harris or Trump will win on November the 5th. Less predictable is what outgoing President Biden will do during the transition. Now, if his vice president wins and Biden wants to secure his legacy or to bolster it, at least in the Middle East, he may agree to some UN Security Council resolutions which the Israeli government will not find amenable, much like President Obama did in late 2016 regarding the settlements. Biden will not have a lot to give to any party in the Middle East in his waning days. If Trump wins, the most important and interesting development we can expect is what happens in the New York court system, where Judge Merchan is supposed to release his decision on the sentence that Trump is supposed to get in a trial he cannot then negate in any way, even as a president, because obviously whatever happens in the federal system, he can cancel one way or the other. Now, regarding Lebanon, Secretary Blinken met in London both with the Jordanian Minister Safadi and earlier with Najib Mikati. the interim prime minister of Lebanon, hoping against hope to salvage something. We haven't seen any change by Hezbollah following the rapid succession in its leadership, because, of course, anyone appointed is almost immediately eliminated by Israel. The Biden administration is trying to get support for a renewed, resurrected, reinvigorated Resolution 1701. It needs a lot of effort for that. And one line of effort is to try to get the Lebanese armed forces to go south of the Litani. And for that, they are asking the IDF to try and limit its operations so that the LAF will not be hurt, because several Lebanese soldiers who were too close to Hezbollah have been killed already. So many efforts, so little output.
Indeed. Well, thank you for so eloquently correcting me about the travel of Blinken to London rather than Amman. But specifically with regard to the LAF, there are increasing calls upon Israel, including in a phone conversation just 2 days ago between Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and his counterpart here in Israel, Yoav Gallant, with regard to Washington's demand that the LAF be not hurt in this context. Of course, during the donor conference that what took place in Paris, the donor nations, roughly 90 donor nations, have pledged roughly $1 billion, 50% of which is the United States, Germany, and France alone, just to put things in context. But $200 million of that are earmarked for the Lebanese armed forces. 800 million of that is earmarked for the humanitarian plight of the Lebanese people. And 10% of what is earmarked for the Lebanese armed forces was actually pledged by the European Union. So there is a lot of money coming from the West into the Lebanese theater. With that being said, there was a quite interesting fact that the Iranians weren't even there, the ones responsible for all the devastation that is now taking place in Lebanon.
But you know, Jonathan, much of that money is earmarked for salaries for the Lebanese army soldiers who are so underpaid that many of them are attracted by Hezbollah, or have been up to now.
Indeed. Well, General Rosen, when we're looking right now at the Lebanese theater, we're seeing Israel establishing more and more facts on the ground, destroying subterranean infrastructure. IDF spokesman, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari mentioned roughly 3,200 targets being destroyed over the past month alone. How long this can something like this last without establishing new parameters, potentially on deepening those successes by launching a parallel operation to further frustrate Hezbollah's hold over Lebanon?
Yeah, there are three efforts that I think the IDF is concentrating on the Lebanese front. One is the destruction of Hezbollah and everything connected to Hezbollah, including the money. The second is the South and creating a de facto DMZ, if you will, right next to the border. Everything that is discussed around the south of the Litani, how will that area look like? Because there are people that live there. Most of the villages south of the Litani, if not most of them, if not all of them, very, very few are not Shiite villages. Most of the Hezbollah infrastructure from Lebanon, from Beirut south, is about 250-ish villages that are Shiite, and most of the armaments, the missiles, all these things are within these villages. So these need to be hit very, very hardly. Again, it's very important for Lebanon. Okay, so there's a double effect here. And the maybe the the third very important thing here is the connection to Iran. Iran's grasp in Lebanon has many facets, and all this connection, the connection with Syria, actually it's trying to interdict the crescent, the Shiite crescent that's going all the way through Iraq, Syria, into Lebanon, coming down south into Israel. This interdiction effort is a huge effort by itself, and all these three have to be dealt with in parallel. And I think that's what we will continue to see in parallel to Israel getting ready until some of the plans were revealed by someone in the US administration, getting ready for the retaliation. I'm guessing that the window for this retaliation is getting very, very narrow, given what Joel mentioned. The window of opportunity here is super, super slim. Israel needs to be, the IDF needs to be very, very accurate in the outcome of this attack, given that, again, actually, we read it through the leaks, the attack on the air defenses. So now it's sort of known, or by the leak, we think we know where this is going. And at the same time, you have to look at, in the wider picture, Turkey just retaliated against oil refineries in the Kurdish part of Syria and northern Iraq. So things are happening not only with Israel. So the Middle East is like the Middle East. It's a huge bazaar. And I think everything will influence Lebanon. And it's just much more time. And again, as Joel mentioned, it's not going to happen in Lebanon before the elections. This is a long-term effort. It's going to take more than months to get everything in place for diplomatic efforts to be successful.
As Sun Tzu wrote in his old book, war is the art of deception. Of course, the utilization of strong power by deception, and therefore those leaks, go figure. To what degree are they part of a scheme or not? We'll let the conspiracy-driven Ayatollah regime fend for itself on this one. But nonetheless, Colonel Rayburn, I'd like to ask you, you don't have very much time left for this, roughly 3 minutes. One, General Lozin mentioned the aerial sorties conducted by Turkey against Kurdish targets. What can you tell us about that? And two, to what degree is the United States preparing for the attack? There are reports of various systems and munitions and aircraft coming into the Central Command area of responsibility. But on the same straw, we do see the USS Truman, Harry S. Truman Strike Group, joining a exercise in the North Sea, despite the fact that it was supposed to be in the Eastern Mediterranean by now, ahead of the anticipated Israeli attack.
Well, to address your second question first, given the Biden-Harris administration's preference for de-escalation and their preference that Israel not respond very significantly to attacks that don't do significant damage inside Israel, I would be surprised if the White House were instructing the U.S. military to take a very substantial role in Israel's impending retaliation against the Iranian regime. That's the first thing. The tactical details and so on, I don't have any insight into those, and I don't think anyone does right now. About your first question, though, there is something happening. There's something stirring. You can see changes, both political and on the ground, along the Turkey, Northern Iraq border. There are developments here in the Turkey PKK conflict and the dynamics internally to Turkey and across the border. I think that has to do with, I think what we're seeing is one of those ripple effects from the weakening of the Iranian regime's power, or it's the weakening of its perceived power, the erosion of its perceived power in the region, because the PKK has been I wouldn't say they're a client or a proxy in the same way that Hezbollah is, but they've been a local ally of the Iranian regime for some time now against Turkey. And the fact that the patron then, the Iranian regime, is weakened, I think is going to open up some opportunities. Also some dangers for Turkey, but some opportunities potentially to make progress for the first time in a long time, I would say more than 10 years, in the Turkey PKK conflict. So it's something to watch. It'll be turbulent, but there may be, if for a new U.S. administration, there may be an opportunity there to try to help broker an end to that conflict, which would be good for the entire region.
I remember over a year and a half, 2 years roughly, Turkish officials telling me about the fact that Hashd Shabi was providing logistical support to the PKK in northwestern Iraq, in addition to
That's
the
right.
fact that, in addition to the fact that once Turkey went on the offensive against the PKK there, they also allowed the PKK to establish a headquarters in Iran and to establish a command and control from there. So there are different rivalries between Turkey and Iran, and they view themselves also historically as the main rivals in the Middle East rather than other actors that are present here today. But we have come to the end of today's edition. I'd like to immediately thank Colonel Rayburn, General Rosen, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update. From here in Jerusalem, wishing you also a Shabbat Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.